rise above the static, dissecting issues diplomatic. With mics in hand, they brave the storm of clashing views and norms transform. The Pundits Podcast, bold and true, shining light on red and blue. Through heated takes and reasoned thought, they seek the truth that can't be bought. From climate change to foreign ties, they parse the spin and sift the lies. No stone unturned, no topic taboo, as left and right come into view. The Pundits Podcast, bold and true, shining light on red and blue. Through heated takes and reasoned thought, they seek the truth that can't be bought. From climate change to foreign ties, they parse the spin and sift the lies. No stone unturned, no topic taboo, as left and right come into view. The Pundits Podcast, bold and true, shining light on red and blue. Through heated takes and reasoned thought, they seek the truth that can't be bought. In times of strife when tensions flare, their steady voices fill the air. With wisdom gained from years gone by, and hopes for brighter days tonight, the Pundits Podcast marches on their epic quest, not yet done, to understand our changing world and keep democracy's flag unfurled.
Hey everybody, this is Razib with the conversation number 6. Our 6th week. It's been going for a little while right now, getting into the groove. I'm here with Josiah Neely as usual, and we are going to be talking about the news of the day, whatnot. Those of you who are listening, not on the Substack, so you won't get the last part of our conversation, but please rate and review so we can get a little bit more traction. And we're thinking about doing things like having guests on and doing AMAs and the usual. So just a little preamble there, but let's just get into it because there's a lot going on. We are recording on Friday, August 30th, and just so you guys know, we do record on Fridays because stereotypically that is the day when people. It's kind of like slow news day, like Friday, Saturday. Obviously, if there's a hurricane, that doesn't matter. But if it's human related, they try to, usually it's pretty slow. So, we're here to talk about abortion first. To start out with the simple, easy topics: abortion, IVF, or as Donald J. Trump would say, reproductive rights. So, why don't you start it off, Josiah?
Okay, and I think the conversation in my mind it's probably going to go back in time as we go, like Memento, because I was thinking it doesn't really make sense to start in the 1950s and try and like work our way up. So let's start with right now, and then we could talk about how we got here or whatever. So over the past few weeks, maybe even a month or two, there have been some shifts in the Republican Party and in the Trump campaign on abortion, kind of moving away from the traditional pro-life stance that most Republicans have had and that Trump had in his last two campaigns. So as you alluded to, Trump tweeted something about how he would be great for reproductive rights as president. Not entirely clear what he meant by that. Then J.D. Vance in an interview said that not only would Trump not support a federal late-term abortion ban, but if Congress did pass such a ban, he would veto it, right? Then even more recently, just yesterday, I think, you had a couple more things. One, Trump said in a speech that he was going to have the government pay for IVF for everyone, or maybe he would make insurance pay for it, but it was going to be free for everybody. And then also at the same time in Florida, on the ballot, right now Florida has a ban on abortion starting at 6 weeks. And there's a constitutional amendment on the ballot in November that I believe would establish a right to an abortion through the 24th week. And Trump was asked how
Viability.
yeah, I don't know. So I have not actually looked at it. Yeah, well, so I haven't looked at the actual text, but so I don't know if it specifies 24, if it specifies viability, how you define that. But given current technology, that's around the same time. Although viability is kind of a moving line a little bit with technology. But anyway, so Trump, the reporter asked Trump how he was planning to vote on that. His answer wasn't totally clear, but it kind of sounded like he was planning to vote for it. He definitely said he did not agree with the 6-week ban. So, okay, so that there's a lot of things there. This has provoked, I would say, some opposition from.
Wait. Just I want to just jump in right here.
Yeah.
Here's the issue. I don't. People like Biden. Joe Biden has said he's personally pro-life, this sort of stuff. I mean, but I think Donald Trump might be the reverse. He's
Right.
personally pro-choice, but he supports. I mean, come on, like everything is signaling.
Yeah, this is an interesting thing, and we can maybe talk a little bit more about this in a bit. But there is a strange history where, for a long time, I think the only GOP nominee since Roe v. Wade, the only GOP nominee who has not been pro-choice at some point in his career was John McCain. Right. Everyone else started out as pro-choice, or like Trump was pro-choice before he became pro-life, before what it is now.
Biden and Gore were pro-life before they became.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So on the flip side, yeah, but like a lot of the Democrats were actually pro-life before they became pro-choice. Ted Kennedy, Jesse Jackson, Biden, of course, Al Gore, as you say. But yeah, like the Bushes started out as being pro-choice. Reagan, it's a complicated story with Reagan, but he did sign a big abortion bill when he was governor of California. Romney, the what?
It was like a decriminalization bill, right?
Yeah. So I think the issue with that particular bill is, they were going to pass a bill, and Reagan. He said, I will not, like, I'll sign the bill if you put in some restrictions, right? Because he, as was the case for a lot of people back then, like, and now, he wanted the abortion laws to be looser than they were. He wanted abortion to be permissible in some circumstances, but he did not want abortion on demand, right? And so he said, basically, okay, you put in restrictions on it, and then I'll sign it. And so they did that, and then after he signed the bill, it was challenged. The restrictions were challenged in court and were voided. So it ended up being an abortion on demand bill, which was not quite what he wanted. But anyway, he was in that sense pro-choice, right? So all of these Republicans, the party. I mean, okay, let's go back to the 1950s. Why not? So, like. Abortion, you go back to the 1950s, abortion is basically illegal everywhere. The early movement to liberalize abortion, to loosen it up, it was not politically polarized the way that we think of it now. There are a lot of pro-life Democrats, and a lot of the early supporters, were Republicans. Even I think South Carolina might have been one of the first states to, liberalize abortion laws or whatever. If you're
talking about the 1950s, let's mention that George Bush's dad's nickname was Rubbers. Like the Bush family was really into Planned Parenthood and family planning.
Right. Yeah. So it's just the issue. So part of it was, you're starting from a baseline of no abortion, right? And so a lot of the people who were in favor of liberalizing, they wanted abortion to be allowed in some cases,
Wait, no legal abortion.
They wanted, they wanted legal abortion in some cases, but not others. And so, like, basically, I think a lot of the early reformers, and this is not okay. So there are some people who they just wanted abortion to be all legal completely, right? And then there's some people who, and this is true today. Some people want abortion to just be legal. Some people want it to just be illegal, or maybe with a couple of exceptions. And then there's a lot of people that are in the middle, where they think that abortion sometimes should be legal, but they also don't want it to just be a free for all. And there's a phrase, it still gets used sometimes today, not as much, is that abortion should be a decision between a woman and her doctor, right? And early on, the focus was much more on the doctor. I think the idea of a lot of the early advocates of liberalization was, well, look, like, doctors know, like, doctors are competent to decide. They should be deciding, like, when the abortion is legitimate, right? When it's needed for medical reasons or other stuff. But they're also not going to just let women get abortions for any reason, right? Now the focus has shifted more onto, like, the woman. She should be able to decide, whatever. But so that was kind of a shift, right? Pre Roe v. Wade, you did have a number of states that legalized abortion, but it was, not all of the people who were advocates of liberalization wanted to go whole hog, I guess you would say, right? And it was not, I mean, it just wasn't polarized. You had a lot of, like, anti-abortion Democrats, a lot of pro-choice Republicans. I kind of think, and there's a good book on this. It's called Defenders of Life. As I'm talking, I will see if I can remember the author. But kind of like, one of the things that helped shift the parties to their current as of 3 months ago position on abortion was Roe v. Wade, because, like, Roe v. Wade, it tied into, it gave, like, conservatives and Republicans a hook, because it tied into, like, a lot of other judicial activism that was going on at the time, in terms of
Busing.
criminal justice, busing, all sorts of other stuff, where, the natural conservative position and was, we're against, Supreme Court activism, whereas liberals were more favorable to it. So even if you were a pro-choice Republican, you could say, I don't like Roe. I think like, abortion should be decided by the states, and then, the other things. So that kind of, like, was a natural focus. Whereas if you were a pro-life Democrat before Roe, typically you had kind of like a two-pronged approach, where you said, like, there's, women have abortions because they're in, financial distress, so there's other things with the economy or whatever that's bad. So we're going to make abortion, we want to keep abortion illegal. Instead, you deal with the problem by having a lot of social programs or other stuff, right? And with Roe, half of that is no longer an option, because, like, abortion is legal and you're not allowed to make it illegal. And so just over time, because of that, the parties just kind of sorted. It took really forever.
There were still prominent pro-life Democrats until the Tea Party.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, even,
Bart Stupak.
Right. Yeah. Bart Stupak. Well, I mean, Harry Reid officially was pro-life. Over time, what happened is the parties kind of sorted. If you're a Republican, you became pro-life, or, switched parties. If you were a Democrat, you became pro-choice or switched parties. And you have a few holdovers, even now. I think Susan Collins in Maine.
And then West Virginia.
Tim Kaine, right, in Virginia.
Is he still officially pro-life?
I don't know if he still is, right? So what would happen?
Thinks he was, but voting, he's kind of evolved.
Right. Yeah. So, like, what would happen? And this happened to Biden too. Is, they say, like, first they're pro-life, but like over time it becomes more and more of an abstract personal thing, and then it kind of just fades out altogether to the point where I don't know if you even know this, but there was like a weird incident last year where Biden was at some rally and someone mentioned that, how horrible it was that Florida had banned abortion after 6 weeks, and Biden was there, and he crossed himself, right? Like this was something demonic, banning abortion,
Yeah.
Okay? Like, which is kind of like a weird, that's kind of like a weird thing.
Just like a quick sidestep of what
Yeah,
we're talking about here on abortion, just in general. When I was younger, as in, like, let's say when I was 18, 17, this was a long time ago in the 90s. It wasn't really that far in the past that George H.W. Bush at this point
right.
was pro-choice. He was pro-choice until 1980, and then he switched, And actually, you're alluding to this, but this is like a deep cut now because he's not a relevant person, but George W. Bush, the second Bush president, when he first ran in Congress, there was a sense he was more pro-choice than his Democratic opponent, in the late 70s. And so,
Yes.
the whole family kind of, at least the men of the family, shifted around 1980. So, when I thought about this, I'm like, okay, like, you're a grown ass man. Like, you don't just like change your opinion on this. And so I was always assuming they're just lying. Jesse Jackson is just lying because Jesse Jackson went the other way. All these people. But the reality is, like, the older you get, the more you realize that psychology is more complicated than that.
Yeah.
And, what we've seen, for example, with the woke stuff, a lot of people that I know 10 years ago were like, this is crap, would say that in public and like they wouldn't care. And now in private, they're believers. But it was like a stepwise process where they would concede on one thing. I mean, I have to do this for now. But eventually, you go through the motions, and it is pretty much what you believe.
Right. And I think that's right. And it kind of works with abortion and the realignment of the parties. I think you kind of saw that work both ways. So you definitely have seen people who, particularly if because like people have a view on an issue, but then there's also a question of how important that issue is to them, like how much of a priority it is. So that certainly you have a lot of people who, okay, they're pro-life, but what they really care about is like healthcare or the economy or whatever. And then over time, if you're in an environment, if you're part of a political movement where everybody else is pro-choice, they agree with you on these issues that really are important to you, like socially, like you're hearing, like if anyone ever says a pro-life thing, it's someone that you don't like, right? If the people who you do like are saying pro-choice things, you kind of move, right? Or on the flip side, what did happen some is, there were people who originally were like pro-life liberals, and then over time, they started to adopt more conservative views on like economics or other stuff for the same reasons, right? Like you're listening, it's like, okay, I'm pro-life. I'm going to listen to Rush Limbaugh because he's pro-life. He talks about abortion. And then while I'm listening, he's saying other stuff about, teachers unions or whatever. And the people who aren't like the teachers unions probably do endorse abortion. And like, this is, so this is just like a natural dynamic that happens. Politicians, I think, are particularly, it's like it happens to them even more than regular people, but it does happen to regular people and pundits. You see all sorts of cases of it, especially over time. And then, of course, the new generation comes up and they don't, for them, it's like, well, it's just always been that way, right? So that's kind of.
Well, I mean, here's one pundit. It's a little ambiguous, I think, by the end, but you probably know this. Well, I mean, this guy's more obscure. Most people don't know. Nat Hentoff of the Village Voice. He remained pro-life until the end. But Chris Hitchens also was like kind of pro-life leaning or said pro-life things, and like part of that is just like Hitchens is kind of a dick.
Yeah, you still. I mean, you never like even now. You will occasionally find someone who is just like a pro-life liberal iconoclast, right? Like Liz Brunig might be an example of this, right? Where I think she's a socialist, but is pro-life or whatever. And frankly, when you get to like this sort of sorting has happened much more among politicians and pundits than it has among regular voters, I would say. Obviously, there has been sorting.
We're seeing on the voting.
There's still like I know, I know a bunch of like pro-choice Republicans, and I know like pro-life Democrats who like you talk to them about it, and they're like, yeah, this is not good, but
I mean, it's probably like 1/3, 1/3.
right.
You know?
Yes.
Which means like it's not like super rare. It might be a minority, but it's not super rare.
It's not super rare, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, that sorting happened. It basically, I think, there's always a question of to what extent were people, lying or was it like a genuine conversion or whatever? It does seem like there was some genuineness there, right? In most cases. And I say that because maybe not for Trump, right? But there have been a lot of people who, have not moved on the issue as much as you would think, given the political realities. I'm thinking of like, the Wisconsin state legislators, those sorts of people, right? Who, as soon as Roe gets overturned, it becomes pretty clear. It's like, this is not going to be a politically, good issue, right? I mean, one of the
the thing with I'm just gonna the Trump thing.
Yeah,
it's kind of like okay. Here's an analogy I'll use. Let's say that like this is like decades ago, and it's like you're trying to like ask someone to marry you, and she's way out of your league, and like it's there's no way you're gonna be able to pull off the wedding if she says yes.
right. Yeah,
and she says yes, and you're like, oh shit. It's kind of like, you know what I'm saying? It's just like
I do, and I think
you pull through, and
yeah. So this is overturning Roe has been a goal of the pro-life movement. Like it was a goal for the pro-life movement for 50 years, right? And they knew it's a Supreme Court decision. The only way you can overturn it, really, well, you could do a constitutional amendment, but practically speaking, you need to just replace the judges that support Roe with other judges that won't support Roe. So you support Republican presidents, so they will do that. And prior to Trump, and I don't know if to what extent this was intentional or if it was just like the luck of the draw, but Republican presidents, they seem to manage to appoint just enough justices that Roe would almost get overturned, but never quite, right? Even though like in the early 90s, there was a decision, Planned Parenthood versus Casey, right, which kind of upheld Roe.
The senator's dad was very, I want to say militant, but strongly pro-life Democrat.
Correct. Yeah, he's the Casey.
Yeah. Bob Casey.
Bob Casey, Senior. Yeah. So in that case, they mostly upheld Roe. They said you could do some more restrictions on abortion, but it was a 5-4 decision. So there were 4 justices that wanted to overturn Roe, and there were 5 that did not. But the 5 that did not, 3 of them were also reported by Republicans, right? And so you just had a habit of Republican judges like kind of squishing out a little bit.
Well, I mean, most of the, a lot of the judges on the Roe decision were Republican appointed, I believe.
Yes, I think.
The parties were different then, but still.
Yeah. So I think maybe 5 of the judges would have been Republican appointees.
Yeah.
And
Berger voted against it, I believe, and Scalia, and one other.
So in Roe, yeah, Scalia was not on the court then. It was Rehnquist.
Oh yeah, majority was Blackmun. He was joined by Berger. I was wrong on that. I think Blackmun and Berger were both Republican.
Right, and maybe Powell as well.
Powell, yeah.
Yeah.
Douglas, Brennan, Stewart, and Marshall.
So
Uh, a
those
dissent.
are yeah,
It
yeah.
says
So yeah,
White
White,
joined by Rehnquist.
right? Yeah, and White was a Kennedy appointee, so it wasn't even. And like
Yeah,
at that point, the parties were not polarized on the
yeah.
issue.
As some of the listeners will know, Nixon was a little concerned about Roe v. Wade because,
Right? He's
what about
on
interracial
the
babies?
Yeah, on the tapes, he does say, I don't like abortion, but there are some cases it's necessary, like if you have a black person and a white person. So, okay, that's Nixon keeping it real, I guess, in his way. I mean, a lot of people feel that way, right?
Yeah,
Even, maybe less now. Like, at least it's not socially acceptable to say that now. But I actually do know people who uh, let's just say that their support for Planned Parenthood is, demographically sophisticated, right? I mean,
yeah,
I'll be honest. Like, there's some people who either explicitly or implicitly they think abortion is a good idea because the types of people who get abortions are people that, in the words of Justice, like Ruth Bader Ginsburg had a quote where she's like, well, people were concerned that there were too many of certain types of people, right?
yeah.
So
Yeah, well, so let's break it down in the United States right now.
yeah,
Abortions, 30% are white women, 42% are black women, 22% are Hispanic, and 7% other.
right.
So, in terms of per capita, it's basically the usual pattern of
Yeah,
black, Latinx, white, and then Asians have lower rates. It's socioeconomically stratified.
correct. Yeah. Um, uh, yeah. And I mean, I remember like even once on Clubhouse, someone said to me, like, Josiah, how can you, if you're right wing, why are you not for abortion? Don't you know it's black people getting abortions or whatever? Which is like, okay, that's not how I
Yeah.
think of things. Um, but
What was I think we were in a conversation. I don't know if it was Clubhouse. I think it might have been. Anyway, it was a conversation where basically like people were calculating now that Roe v. Wade had been overturned, like what were the future demographics of Mississippi and Alabama going to be?
right.
Those are very inelastic states, as we said last week, where it's
Yes.
like the proportion, the more black people there are, the more Democrat voters there are.
Mhm.
So they were
Yeah.
just and like yeah.
Yeah. And this is actually, it's a bit of a complicated question because, um, like abortion does not result in like, it's not a one for one thing in the sense that, um, like if you look at the US, like this is also something that sometimes pro-life people will make is like, well, abortion has been bad for like social security or other things because there's all these missing people. And the reality is that is true in some cases, but also in some cases, like women do like have an abortion now and then they'll have kids later. And if they had not had the abortion and had the kid, they would not have had the kids later or as many kids or something, or
Yeah, it's not a substitution or
correct. Yeah.
it's
And
still
and it
collateral
does
effect.
affect it also, like if abortion is not an available option to some extent, that affects people's behavior and like they don't necessarily get pregnant first place. Anyway, it does have like, so that whole element, it's complicated, right?
Well,
That-
basically, if you talk about it in a utilitarian way, it gets really gnarly, is what you're getting
right.
at.
Yes. Yeah.
And so
Um,
that's really easy that both the left and the right have focused on rights-based language in a way, normative, just like
correct.
values.
Yeah. Yeah. It's actually, it's probably one of the few, um, big political issues in America where both sides can appeal to like rights in that sort of fundamental intuitive way, life, choice. These are both things that Americans really like or whatever. And maybe that's part of the reason why Americans seem so conflicted on the issue. It is the case, if you look at polling, like there are, it's a minority, it's not a fringe view. but there is a minority that says no restrictions on abortion. And then there's another minority, also not a fringe view, but a definite minority that says, no abortions basically ever,
Exceptions.
no exceptions, or maybe like life of the mother. I don't know. Like when someone says no exceptions, what do they mean in that case? I don't know. But most, the bulk of the country feels like some abortions, like rape, incest, right? That's a common thing. People have different views on like early versus late term abortion or whatever. So that most people feel kind of and a lot of people, even if they think it's legal, they think it's bad. Like taxpayers shouldn't pay for it or whatever.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that's notable, in my opinion, because we're a little too young to remember this. There was a period in the 70s and early 80s where abortion had been almost normalized in pop culture. So in Fast Times at Ridgemont High, one of the protagonists had an abortion, and it wasn't like a shameful thing. It was something she did.
Right.
By the late 80s and the 1990s, that was taboo. Abortion was, the pro-life movement had raised enough consciousness that Hollywood had got the signal that they shouldn't, show abortion in general as a positive thing, or like at least a neutral thing. And there's like, for example, Circle of Friends, that movie. I think in the book, she went to England to have an abortion, and in the movie she had a miscarriage. That's the kind of substitution, the kind of thing you do.
Yeah, you usually, by the time you get to like the late 80s and the 90s or whatever, the typical compromise in media was the woman accepts that she has the right to do the abortion, but then she chooses not to. And maybe there's like either she gives the birth to the baby or there's a miscarriage or something like that, right? That's
basically it's a pro-choice, but they always choose life.
Correct. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Basically what happened.
Yeah. So for a long time, because of Roe, so most people want some abortion, right? But there's another factor which I think is maybe even more important politically, which is there's issue intensity, not just like issue preference, right? So one thing that you see a lot, I mean, you see this with guns, right? There are a lot of gun laws, like types of background checks or whatever, where if you poll it, it's like an 80-20 issue, right? Like 80%, people support this, 20% don't. And so if you're a politician and you see that, you might think, okay, well, it's politically safe for me to try and push this background check type thing or whatever. And what people have found out is, well, no, because the 80%, they might favor it, but they're not going to vote for you or not vote for you based on that issue, right? They think their concern is immigration or crime or the economy or whatever. Whereas, maybe like the 20%, they really care. Like they will, if you push, some sort of gun control thing, they will not vote for you. They'll sit home or they'll vote for your opponent. Similarly, with abortion for a long time, whatever the macro level polling was, if you looked at like who was actually voting on the issue, it was a pro-life advantage. It wasn't a huge pro-life advantage, but it was a pro-life advantage. So especially if you're a Republican, you basically have nothing to lose. This is going to vary depending on where you are in the country, but you're not going to have anything to lose from supporting it because it's going to get you some votes on net, and you can't actually do anything about it because Roe is there, right? And to some extent, the pro-life movement, I think they kind of took advantage of this. They exploited it. One thing that happened when Roe was overturned, the decision was sent back to the states. A bunch of states had passed so-called trigger laws, right? Where, the state years and years ago had passed a law that said, okay, we realize because of Roe, we can't make abortion illegal, but we're going to pass this law that says if Roe is ever overturned, abortion will automatically become illegal, right? And I don't know what was in the minds of the legislators who passed that law, but to some extent, it didn't feel like it probably there probably were some people who voted for that who would not have voted for it if it was actually going to make abortion illegal next Tuesday, right? So they did that, and so when Roe was overturned, you had all sorts of states. There were a lot of states that are deep red, and it's perfectly plausible that abortion is going to be legal in there. But you also had states like Wisconsin or Arizona, other places where it's just like very marginal. There's no way that they could have gotten an abortion bill passed, and that's kind of led to some tricky politics for some people.
Yeah. Well, it's in Arizona. Well, so one thing that right after the Dobbs whatever was decided, and like, I mean, just, full disclosure, most people probably like, I'm definitely on the pro-choice side and you're not. So,
right.
just so people know, not a big deal, but,
well, it is
it's
a
not,
big deal, but yeah, it's,
yeah, well, for me, it's not like the biggest issue. So mostly because like the national majority is in my position. So I don't know. It's kind of like, as long as we have a democracy, I'm not like super stressed. But although I'm in we're recording in a state where abortion is very difficult to get, right?
Correct. I mean, abortion is illegal in Texas. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, so one thing that I did is I'll post I think the link on the show notes was like I checked like the surveys on abortion with the public thought and then the proportion that voted for Trump. And it's like a really tight correlation, but there are some states that are shifted over, what I call like the libertarian states, where they vote much more Republican than they're pro-life. Okay, and so the list of those states, the really libertarian ones, are actually not super surprising: New Hampshire, Alaska, Montana, Wyoming, and the only one that was surprising was Oklahoma. Although ecologically, it's like kind of like that plains like libertarian. I don't know.
That is interesting.
Florida, Nevada, Maine, and Nebraska are all clearly more pro-choice than they vote Republican, right? And then on the other end, you have states like Mississippi, Arkansas, Alabama, Kentucky, Louisiana, Texas, Georgia. Like those are states that actually are somewhat more pro-life than they vote Republican. At least some of that is blacks and Latinos that vote Democrat who are pro-life, right? And so I think like so the issue in Florida is it's going to be 60% to pass this measure, but it is also a state that does lean pro-choice, but it's always had like a really militant. I'm going to use the word militant, but very activist Catholic pro-life element. Obviously, the Cubans, I think like Martinez, the governor of the 90s, tried to pass a pro-life legislation. So they've always like tried to push it in that direction. But we've had Roe v. Wade, so it didn't matter. And now it matters. And like the issue with Florida that you have to remember, I think, is it is a Republican state because of people who moved there. A lot of people who moved there, though, it's because like libertarian Republican reasons. The taxes are very good. And also a lot of the old people, yeah, they vote Republican because they're like, high net worth old people. But, they're not like necessarily like super ideologically conservative.
Yeah. So there is a new dynamic, I would say, pre-Roe, pre-Dobbs. If you're a Republican, there's basically, and you're not in, Maine or New England, there's not really a downside to being pro-life. Now, the macro polling hasn't necessarily changed that much, right? There have been there have in some polls there's been some like shifts really actually over the like pre-Dobbs over the last decade. People have been getting more liberal on a number of different issues.
A lot of that is just religion. Like when counts
a lot of that's just religion, right?
Yeah, it's just like more non-religious people in younger cohorts, and that's what's shit.
Right. Yeah, but overall there hasn't been a big shift. But the issue intensity has changed. So if you ask people in polls, like what's your most important issue? Abortion used to be like 2%, 4%, something like that. And now it's like 15%, 18% maybe, right? And that while the net of the 2 to 4% was pro-life, the net of the 18% is very pro-choice, right? Like the people who say abortion is the most important issue are like supermajority pro-choice, right? So, and this is for Trump. I think part of the reason why you're seeing this move is like abortion is the one issue in which the Democrats have a kind of decisive advantage. Like if you ask voters, like, who do you trust more on the economy or immigration, border, even on preserving democracy, like voters say they trust Trump more than the Democrats, or it's very close, it's basically a tie. Whereas abortion is a Democratic advantage. So, okay, if you're Trump, like you don't really care about the issue at all. Like your instincts are maybe pro-choice. You've been pro-choice for most of your life. You want to try and neutralize the issue. So they're trying to do that. They're trying to moderate. And to some extent, I think that makes sense as a political strategy. Actually, before I go there, let's talk a little bit about IVF, because that's kind of a special case, right? Because we mentioned IVF. And IVF really is an issue where like opposition is kind of fringe, right? Like I think I
know everyone who's militant about it. Just joking.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I am not a fan of IVF, right? So this, but I recognize that this is like not just a minority view, but it's like a very minority view. Like the one poll I found on it, like was, 70% of Americans thought IVF is good, 8% bad, right? 70. So like 8%. Okay. That's pretty small. So there's basically not really any organized political opposition to IVF in the United States. There was a court case in Alabama a few months ago, which kind of got misinterpreted by the media. In my opinion, it was kind of disgraceful. Like basically what happened is there was a couple, they had like frozen some embryos at a clinic that they were going to try and use. And some the clinic had left the storage facility unsecured, and some like just random guy wandered in and was like, "Whoa, what's in here?" And he kind of like dropped their embryos on the floor and destroyed them, killed them. And so they were suing to like basically the clinic, saying like, "Hey, you destroyed our embryos." And to sue under the question was like, could they sue under like the wrongful death statute or whatever? And the Alabama court said, yes, you can. And like a lot of the media coverage implied that this was like banned, like this decision meant that IVF was going to be banned or other stuff. And really, like, if you think about it, like the decision was pro IVF parents in a sense, right? Because they were, but okay, fine. Like that's the way the media is. So it's understandable that Republicans, if you're Trump, like you want to do something bold to try and make clear that you're not anti-IVF. I don't know, like even apart from my own views about IVF, I don't know if having the government pay for it really makes a lot of sense. Maybe, like I've heard some people say, oh, well, it'll pay for itself fiscally because new people will pay taxes and, blah, 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 blah. Okay, whatever. But it's not.
I should say 2.5% of babies born in the U.S. are now IVF babies, which
right. Right. And other countries, there are some other countries that do have free IVF. Maybe like I think the highest IVF rate is in the world is Israel, where they really do a lot to promote it, and there it's 5%, right? So that's real. That's you probably know somebody, you probably know people who have conceived via IVF at 5% or even 2.5%, but it's not the majority. But it's such a popular issue. I don't think that it's like politically, I don't think there's really a downside for Trump for doing this. I do think with some of the other abortion comments, there are some risks politically. One thing is, like, if you're Trump, what you really want is for people to not be talking about abortion at all, right? Like, it's just like, even if you like by moderating manage to reduce how bad an issue it is for you, it's still going to be, you're still going to be underwater. And so you want to talk about issues that are positives for you, strong for you, like the economy, the border. Maybe you want to talk about how Kamala covered up Biden's dementia or whatever, like almost anything other than abortion, right?
Yeah, and one thing I have to say is I just thought it was really weird. I mean, broadly, I'm actually kind of like his moderating on this issue, but
Right.
also you have to be really careful how you do it. So, he puts out a thing on True Social where they use the word reproductive choice. Who's checking the copy here, because that's a signaler, right?
Yeah.
So the way that the pro-abortion ballot measures, abortion rights ballot measures have been winning in red states, they've been very clear. They've been using freedom libertarian language,
Right.
right? So they haven't been using reproductive justice and reproductive health and these
Right.
things, right? Because those are very, very left coded. So the fact that he's using that language is just that's really there's no call for that. You could use libertarian language or states' rights language, which he has been using. But someone approve that? What is going on here?
So that's not good. And then, the other thing is I do think that there is a risk to Trump. I mean, it's true that most of the people who vote on the issue of abortion are pro-choice, but a lot of them are never going to vote for Trump no matter what, right? Whereas the pro-life abortion voters were going to vote for Trump, and they probably still will, but there is a risk that he could alienate them, not only with what he said, but the worry that I've heard from various people is, well, what is he going to say next? There's been a whole series of things as he moderates, and so the concern is, well, where does it end? What are we like? Obviously, it's sort of this is, I think, exacerbated by the fact that if you're a voter for whom the pro-life issue is paramount, it's not a normal political issue for you, right? It's a moral issue where there are a lot of people who they just don't want to vote for a pro-choice candidate. And even if you say, well, the other candidate is worse, which objectively is true, however much Trump moderates, he's not going to be a Democrat on the issue. They just don't see it that way. If they saw it that way, it wouldn't be a preeminent issue for them. So I do think there is a risk that Trump could alienate voters that he does need without necessarily picking up enough compensating voters, by moderating. So I think, I'm not a political strategist, but it seems to me that you should try and shut up about the issue, change the subject. And then B, if you are going to talk about it and you can moderate, but you want to pair that with something that could you show a contrast with Kamala Harris. So I think the what?
There needs to be a real brand differentiation, not just kind of a moderate version of her.
So, one thing that Trump could do is he could go big on, no taxpayer funding for abortion, say, right? That's something where it's not, that is, I think, still politically popular. It kind of feeds into, you could say look, whatever you women should have the ability to do this, at least, in early stages or whatever, but we shouldn't be forcing people to pay for it, including people who have moral objections, right? I think that would be a clear differentiation with Kamala Harris. It would give pro-life people, it would highlight, okay, even if we don't like what Trump is doing, he's still going to be better than her. And then, so that would be my recommendation. Say that, and then try and talk about something else, right? Because I do think, if you keep having this thing where it's just drip, 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 some new thing, it could actually hurt him, even though overall it's a majority position, right?
So I think a lot of this is the way, as you're saying, the way you put it in communications. So just objectively, I think it's probably, I don't know how they dodged the question, but having JD Vance, who has previously in his political career staked out an extremely strong pro-life position, say that Trump would veto a federal bill that would, do like 15 weeks or whatever, which is actually a pretty moderate, kind of a majority position, actually. I think that that's honestly just weird. And I think I don't know like who's advising him about
I
that,
think,
because that's
and I'm a big JD fan. I think he has a flaw, which I think a lot of smarter people have sometimes, which is he needs to get better at just not answering the question. So someone asked, what happened is the reporter said, he said Trump doesn't support a federal ban on late-term abortion, and the reporter said, well, what if one passed, right? And okay, so he felt like he had to answer it. If it were me, like my suggestion is, look, don't answer the question, like just say, look, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, it's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen. You need 60 votes. Like, obviously not. This is a waste of time that you're talking to me about this. Let's talk about the important issues like inflate. This is, I think, a necessary political skill. And it's hard, I think, for someone who is used to being like for me, if someone asks me a question, I feel like, okay, well, like, let me address it and answer it and take it literally or whatever. And in politics, you need to learn how to like evade, right? And weed, so that would be something that I think there needs to get better at that, right?
Let me read the summary of the Florida ballot, by the way.
Sure.
No law shall prohibit, penalize, delay, or restrict abortion before viability or when necessary to protect the patient's health, as determined by the patient's healthcare provider. This amendment does not change the legislature's constitutional authority to require notification to a parent or guardian before a minor has an abortion. So it's also titled Full Text of the Proposed Amendment. Amendment to limit government interference with abortion. Again,
right.
The abortion rights activists are very, very they're very, very smart in how to attack this issue in red and purple states. They are not using frankly I find the language annoying. What the fuck is reproductive justice? You know what I'm trying to say? I don't know.
I know exactly what you are trying to say. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's so that
justice for the fetus. Injustice for the fetus.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, that is tactically smart if they want to do it that way, to do it. And I mean, we'll have to see. It looks like, and even I don't know what the language is in Arizona, but in Arizona right now they have a 15. They had a full ban. The Republican legislature actually repealed that in favor of a 15-week ban, because they knew that the ballot measure was going to be up, and they thought if we have a full ban, there's no way it's going to maintain. With a 15-week ban. Maybe, in theory, that should be popular. The referendum might pass anyway. So we'll have to see.
So I do have to say that and I was talking on social media with people about this. Like, I know Trump, said he was pro-life, but like, bro, like if you say that you think in your state a 6-week ban is too stringent, you don't believe in a ban.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Right.
Told people that you are pro-choice. So people are telling me like, oh, like, well, he appointed. And I'm like, I don't care. My point is like, like, you're not doing a very good job hiding your real views when you just impromptu tell people that you think 6 weeks is too early. Like, you're supposed to technically be against it at 0 weeks.
Right.
Maybe I'm just being a little too nerdy here, but
Yeah. Right. Exactly. I mean, it's like with Trump, I don't know. He got support in his prior runs from.
Hope you enjoyed the podcast so far. To listen to the rest of it, please go to conversation.substack.com.
Two minds met on a summer's eve, each with truths they long believed. Words flowed like a winding stream, as hours passed in deep debate. And after all was said and done, they found a thread of common ground. In listening close, they came to see a shared humanity. They spoke of justice, spoke of change, of history's weight and future's range. Their views at first seemed worlds apart, but patience bridged the divide. And after all was said and done, they found a thread of common ground. And listening close, they came to see a shared humanity. They spoke of justice, spoke of change, of history's weight and future's range. Their views at first seemed worlds apart, but patience bridged the divide. It's not about who's wrong or right, but understanding others' light. In civil discourse we can find the ties that gently bind. And after all was said and done, they found a thread of common ground. And listening close, they came to see a shared humanity. As dawn broke soft on dewy grass, they smiled and shook hands at last. Two souls enriched by reason talk, united in respect. And after all was said and done, they found a thread of common ground. And listening close, they came to see a shared humanity. This folk song captures the essence of a long, thoughtful discussion between two public intellectuals. It emphasizes the power of patient listening, mutual respect, and the discovery of common ground. The gentle tone reflects the common understanding they reach after their debate. Would you like me to expand